welcome to our podcast, Simply Be Kind. If this is your first time listening, this podcast is a series of conversations with people about kindness. We hope that today's episode inspires you to do one kind thing today because it's easy to simply be kind. What is patriarchy and why does Taylor Swift, amongst other people, want to smash it? Even though I'm a proud feminist, I know that this isn't a feminist podcast. This is a kindness podcast. But patriarchy does impact my ability to be kind. So, we are going to discuss how patriarchy impacts kindness. It creates this culture of competition and aggression that hinders our natural tendency towards empathy and compassion. And the unequal distribution of power between genders in certain aspects of our society has caused us all to realize how unfair it is, and rightly so, because as we know, that disparity is never good because when there is imbalance in power, it often gives someone the audacity to be overpowering and unkind. For our slightly heavy conversation today, we have Deepti Arora and Astha Negi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tanaz.
Now that we kind of set the tone for what the conversation is going to be, let's do a deep dive into how patriarchy impacts our lives. Can you share how patriarchy impacts us at home, Deepti?
Sure. So I believe that patriarchy is it's very deep rooted in our society, and in fact, it can be observed at every point in our lives. For example, you take the case of filling a form for your child where the father's name is most important. In fact, if you say that you just want to put a mother's name, there are often, objections to it. Two, expectations from the family members of what our role as a woman should be with respect to every relation in our lives. The pressure to manage career, home, kids, social, extended relations is so much more higher on the woman than it is on the male of the household. For example, the husband's or the male's role is very well defined that he's the head of the family who provides for everybody by earning. But whereas for us women, there is no definition. We are supposed to do every and anything that comes up. And very interestingly, the credit of everything, if things happen well, goes to the male of the house. Whereas if things go wrong, then it's the female's problem.
That sounds incredibly annoying. Does that happen at work too, Asta?
Yeah, sure. Women in general in workforce see different elements of patriarchy, every day. Let's say during interviews, you are asked questions like, are you married or do you plan to have kids? So, somehow motherhood or marriage, they decide a woman's career progression. So women enter workforce which is already unfavorable to them.
So I was actually also thinking about this one interview that I had, where I was, I think I was 24 or 25, so I was of age in
Hmm.
the traditional sense. And one of the questions that they asked, I mean, it was a very bad interview because they were asking me how to sell a pen, so you know the standard of the interview. But one of the questions that they asked me was like, okay, so you're 25, so what are your plans for the future? And I knew what they were getting at, but I did, like, I played the card. I was like, wait, what do you mean? And they said, no, you any plans to get married? And at that age I was still very rebellious, so I was like, I have no plans to ever get married. And, and then they out loud they wrote down that, okay, not anytime soon, which is
Hmm.
like, but that was not my answer. My answer was, no, I'm not going to get married. This does
Yeah.
not impact my career at all. And they still chose to translate that into not right now, maybe next year or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I do agree that somehow, like, they do categorize that women are eventually going to get married, they're eventually going to have kids, that's
Yes.
going to impact the workforce, and
Yeah.
that's just like a pre-decided notion that
Yeah,
they.
and this flows over in the home situation
Hmm.
because then let's say when you're with your family or extended family, there's this constant pressure and this constant conversation of when are you getting married, when are you getting married, or when you get married, when are you having a baby, when are you having a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So somewhere I think they're all linked because the people are the same. People who are there at home are the same people who are your managers at
Yes.
workplace.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the second element that we see is pay disparity, like I say, but which is thankfully being called out. So I'm a lawyer, so from a legal professional point of view, it's extremely patriarchal, it's sort of like an all boys club, especially when you go to the litigating lawyers who go to court. Women have to work twice as hard. They need to be fierce and strong to prove themselves, so that the society takes them seriously, at least the fraternity takes them seriously. But well, the flip side is strong independent women are perceived as threat to the society, because the society wants compliant women, like submissive women, so to speak. And a kind woman is often, she'll be treated as a pushover, or they'll be okay, you can sort of walk over her. But in the recent past, because of awareness around mental health issues and things like that, so there are gender equal laws which are helping, helpful in these situations. And I think we need kindness and empathy towards women who are taking break due to motherhood, or let's say who have recently gotten married, and they are entering the workforce again. So yeah, because I say that I mean the statistics say that 20% of workforce in India consists of women, which is a very low number, and it puts us at par only with those strict countries who go by rule of law, like Afghanistan or other Middle Eastern countries.
That's actually very shocking to hear that, even though I think, I mean, I'm not sure how right I am, but I know that women are at least like 50, or like we're almost at like an equal population count, and hearing that only 20% is really shocking.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I
Deepti.
think number reduces as we go up the ladder. As we
Yes.
move up the senior and especially the board representation, the number would be in single digits.
Yeah. Yeah, so also kind of shifting the narrative also, like how do you choose kindness, and how do you let kindness win over patriarchy in situations like this where the stats are so striking?
So I do believe there is a relation between kindness and patriarchy, though it is difficult because I think the collective energy of women right now is angry and rebellious because of centuries of subjugation. But going forward, that is something that will lead to more oppositions and more fights. So I think if we can kind of choose the path of kindness, because also if we look at it, men and women both are victims of patriarchy. Even the men don't know better, because whether it is through conditioning of beliefs, the experiences, the privileges that a man has had, and the way they have been conditioned to look at gender, in my experience, most of the time a man does not even realize that his expectations, his actions, his words are unkind, or he's being patriarchal to the other gender, because he does not know otherwise. And
Mm.
Hmm.
similarly, why only men? I mean, we have come across enough women who are equally patriarchal,
Right.
and I think the root cause is because they have not seen anything better while growing up or what they have been taught. For example, when if you look at schools, when a teacher is discussing a subject or career choices with high school students, more often than not, you will hear the teachers talking to the boys about sciences and maths as career options, whereas the girls are some people who can take humanities. Like recently I've heard some girls saying that in their school the teacher was talking about medical, and by default she said, while looking at the girls, that you all should look at taking up easier options, like let's say dentistry. No offense to these lines, but in terms of timings, in terms of your commitment. So she mentioned like dentistry or dermatology, whereas to the guys it was more about neurosurgeon and cardiologist. So somewhere there is inherent bias, and I think this is where kindness can play a big role, because it's easier to go and call them out and fight out with them. But if we can call out, keeping in mind that they are coming from a certain conditioning,
Hmm.
I think then kindness can play a big role. Confrontation will only lead to fights and arguments, whereas kindness will give us an understanding of their point of view while making them understand where we are coming from, and hopefully make it a win win situation.
No, that is so true. And yeah, I think sometimes people don't even realize what they're saying because the conditioning has come from home, and it's come from just different things like movies and things like that. There's just so much conditioning that I think the only way you can remove it, and I do agree that there are people that like are activists and they work all of that, and their work is great. But I also think that sometimes bringing change needs to be so minor, so it starts from like having movies like I might be digressing a little, but like I've seen a lot about, a Zoya Akhtar making a movie versus, like a Salman Khan movie, where
Yes, yes.
the storylines are so different because the roles of the men were written by women, and it's not of them being like very feminine or things like that, but they're just so much more gentle, and there's so
Yes.
much more understanding of just women, and not just women but also like surroundings and stuff. It's not all macho, and I think you don't need to be macho. You can kind of get there and also just be kind through
No,
that.
totally agree. If you see Zoya Akhtar movies, also the women are given the agency. If you see,
Hmm.
the way, even if it's a small role, the way she conducts her life, the way she is in charge of her decisions is very different from a Salman Khan. I mean, that's toxic masculinity out there.
Yes.
And I also believe that, so the major difference, I think, between the two is also in Zoya Akhtar's movie, it is everybody's together, like that Hum Saath Hai types, where it is us versus, there's no versus. It's like all of us trying to do something with our lives, whereas Salman Khan movies are us versus them.
Mm.
And I think that's where kindness plays a role, because the moment we make something us versus them, that itself is confrontational and leading to a fight, which leads the other party to become defensive, because of which they become offensive.
That's true. Also, I've realized that when people do advocate for like gender equality, like unintentionally, they also do tend to say that okay, we need women in certain industries, but then let's give them HR in this industry, or let's
Mhm.
give them desk jobs in the industry. No one's saying that okay, a woman can be a truck driver or a woman can, steer a ship. Those are things that women can completely do, but it's never the first thing on someone's mind. Asta, have you seen something similar in your line of work?
Yeah, I mean, I must admit that it's difficult to choose kindness in the face of patriarchy, especially when you see women, this women with same experience level, not earning as equal to their male counterparts, or women who are laid off or denied promotion because they just gave birth, or they're and that they cannot focus on in their work because they are not available fully. So, I mean, yes, I mean, I've seen instances of patriarchy here, but uh, I think personally, when I face these kind of instances in my workplace, I choose my battle because I don't want, I want to be kind to myself as well. And I also tell my peers and my colleagues and my juniors, let's say, that, not every battle needs to be fought with on the same footing as, like it's not a war. So just be kind to yourself, take a step back, analyze the situation, see whether you really want to call it out or you just want to walk away from it. Because that also helps you sort of recalibrate and whether it's worth it, and uh, because it's sometimes it's necessary to correct a situation but not always. But I mean, but if you want to call it out, you call out, you will definitely get support from your seniors, or let's say from the management or from the firm as such. So, but then it's only so much you can do, because it's a 1,000-year-old tradition. It's not going to change overnight. But I guess all of us need to be agents of change. And like, Deepti said, like you said, it's going to take like little bit by bit. You can only change, start from yourself, then your home, probably, then your workplace, and so on and so forth.
No, I think something that Asta said about being kind to yourself, that's a very important point, because in our attempt to fight the society and make good of everything, we forget ourselves. So I think when we say kindness and patriarchy, the biggest gift would be if we are kind to ourselves and see what works for us. Because if every individual came from that space, the world itself would become a better place.
Yeah.
When you're faced with patriarchal situations, how do you choose to tackle it with kindness?
So I have also changed over the years. Like I think when I was younger in my 20s and early 30s, it was more of a rebel, where whether at workplace or home, I would be like the Jhansi ki Rani, always out to fight. And I realized it doesn't work, because the moment you start fighting, the society doesn't support you. The people around you tag you as a troublemaker. So
Hmm.
even when you're making a genuine point, it somewhere gets lost in the whole noise. So I'll go with what Astha said. It's about choosing your battles. And I think the second important point is creating your allies,
Hmm.
not a lone fight. And that ally can be a male or a female, someone who understands you, who understands where you're coming from. So
Yeah.
I think kindness works in patriarchy if you go with preparedness. Like instead of just responding in the heat of the moment, if you can just take a step back, look at the situation, and then decide how best to tackle this person or this situation.
Yeah.
That's what's been working for me last couple of years.
Okay. That makes sense, I think, because when you do kind of take a step back, that I realize that kind of space, that kind of gap really helps your brain reset and think, okay, wait, now that I'm calmer, how do I how do I address a certain situation? I mean,
One thing that I've learned is that because all of us carry a lot of collective emotions,
mm,
sometimes in that moment it may not even be anything to do with that person or that situation, but that collective emotion is coming through. So that
yeah.
stepping back helps us to segregate the collective emotion and what we are feeling in that moment, in that situation. And you'll see that sometimes it may not even be about patriarchy. That person is not putting you down or saying something just because you're a female, but that's his point of view. Somewhere we've also learned to look at everything from a gender point of view, which may not
Yeah.
be true for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's just one bit I want to add here. You know what I've in my little observation whenever I go back home, and my home is a little village in Dehradun, let's say, it's I see a lot of women perpetuating patriarchy and patriarchal norms, and let's put it like that. And what I feel that women should also be purposefully engaged, so that and it's even better if they're financially independent. A lot of the things will resolve, all these issues will probably come to a point where there's a deep understanding of issues. This constant fight around the power in the household and things like that, those issues are something that I feel that if women are purposefully engaged, will come to sort of like a stop, if not completely go away, but it'll definitely, situation would calm down. This is what I feel.
No, that's actually true, and which is why I also know that patriarchy or even toxic masculinity kind of works both ways, and which is why it's also important to have all of those conversations. And the next episode that we have after this next month is
Mm.
going to be about toxic masculinity, and we are going to have like a man's voice and how he's going to share how toxic masculinity has impacted him. And we're also going to have a woman share that how women can be equally guilty of toxic masculinity, but also how women are like a good support system towards men, and how when you do all of that, then at the end of the day, then you realize how silly patriarchy is and how silly toxic masculinity is and how
Yeah,
better the world can be without it.
absolutely.
So while women are being trained to, voice out and be out there, the men are not being trained how to deal with such women. So they are still growing up in that conditioning of seeing a different kind of a setup in their parents' marriage, in their extended family marriages, or whatever relationships. But when they have to set a household, suddenly the person who comes into their life is of a very different
Yes.
universe. So
Yeah.
I think that's also where a lot of conflicts happen.
Yeah, I remember Deepti and I were discussing once that one of the clubhouse huddles should be on how do you train your boys, at a young age in this whole gender neutral, diversity and inclusion space that we have right now. Because, that's so important. As you grow up, your kids also need to be brought to that, let's say, to face that kind of world now. Things are changing. Definitely. It's not the same what it was pre pandemic, also.
Yeah.
So, in that sense.
This was a really good session and a good episode. Thank you so much, you both, for being here. And the people that are listening to this are going to be really happy and they're going to learn a lot from this episode. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Our pleasure.
It was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Simply Be Kind podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, can you do us a huge favor and rate and review it? Because it helps more listeners find the show. Subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or whatever platform you use. Each episode is under production for around a month, and hence we only release it once a month. So it's a huge help if you can take your time to review it and share the episode with your friends and on social media. If you have any thoughts on today's episode, or you have topics that you would want us to further touch upon, reach out to me on Instagram. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon.